Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast. In the biopharma outsourcing industry, consultants are a vital but often underappreciated sector. Their work helps emerging biotechs avoid costly pitfalls and make critical business decisions, while enabling big pharma to optimize and rationalize networks. So isn't it time that this valuable sector received the recognition it deserves? Someone working to change that is today's guest, Sison, a long-term consultant himself, who's launching a new initiative, the Society of Professional Pharma Consultants.
Great to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. Welcome. But before we jump in, I think it might be useful to define a bit what you see as the role of consultants in today's biopharma outsourcing landscape. The term consultants means many things to many different people. I mean, how do you tend to define it and break it down?
Right. And that's just it. There is no definition. Anybody can be a consultant. You just go out there, hang a shingle, and off you go. And it kind of works in science, engineering, and in pharma because you've got a lot of highly educated, highly talented people that very often come out of industry with incredible amount of experience, right? But I'd like to say after 15 years of consulting, there's a bit of an art to it. So let's start with just kind of define a little bit of what pharma consulting is. I've always seen there's about 3 or 4 different archetypes in consulting, right? You've got the guy that's looking, between jobs and looking for something else, but he doesn't want to say he's unemployed. So he or she, says, okay, I'm a consultant. Maybe I'll take on a gig work. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. For a lot of people, they just feel a lot more comfortable being an employee, W-2, working for somebody else. Even an incorporated consultant, as in somebody that works for a large company like BDO or McKinsey, they're consultants too. And so maybe that's another category, incorporated, employed consultants. And then you got guys like me. I enjoy doing it. I found my place in this industry, working on multiple projects, learning as much as I can in as many different scenarios as possible, and applying best practices across the field. And then you've got guys like my former colleague, Peter Bigelow, who after a successful career in pharma, as an executive at Patheon, as an executive at big companies like Pfizer, he is just prized for a lot of his leadership capabilities. And so you have a lot of executives that sort of are at the tail end of their careers that consult at a very high level as expert advisors. And then maybe you've got, I might display a little bit of this. You've got those scientists, engineers that are unemployable. We just have too much of a rogue streak in us, and we just have to do things our own way.
Is that where you sit, Ray?
You can go consultants, or you could just start your own company, right? And in a sense, they're one and the same, right? So as an independent contract, sometimes we have to think of ourselves as entrepreneurs starting our own company. Jeff Kiplinger, I think you might have interviewed him too. I wrote a great book about that, Experts to Entrepreneurs. It's the idea is like you've got expertise and you've got ideas, go out and start your own company. And having done that several times, really that's not a hurdle for somebody like me. Starting something that's new is a challenge, and I'll get it done, but we'll have it up and running by next Tuesday. But for a lot of people, it's a heavy lift, right? It's a paradigm shift for them that they have to sort of overcome. So, I mean, when we talk about consulting, I like to say with any kind of new business, it is anything you want it to be, right? That's the beauty of a new business. You can define it any way. You can give yourself whatever title, and it is whatever you want it to be. Your company needs to have a mission, and that mission might be the thing that makes your heart sing, right? So that I think is at least a good place to start, right? So pharma consulting right now, let's say it's just this overgrown patch of weeds. Everybody's just doing their own thing, looking for what makes them happy, looking for ways to make a living or to supplement your family's income in some way that gives them the right balance. So, it's right now, it's really undefined here. That's the short answer.
Kind of like the Wild West.
Yes. The Wild West compared to what it could be an English garden, yes. Right? So here we are talking across the pond. Let's use that.
So what are the sort of projects which generally would bring someone like yourself into the mix? So let's say there's an early stage biotech and they're just starting to think about how they're going to scale up. What type of consulting services would they typically need?
Okay, great question. So I've landed on 2 different approaches here. One is, there's strategic consulting and there's tactical consulting. In other words, you're a startup company and maybe your founding members are, a finance investor and a physician. So you've got finance and you've got clinical experience. but you recognize you have a gap. You have several gaps, right? So you want to fill that hole with expertise. CMC, drug product development, might be that gap. The other place I see, like an example of tactical is, okay, you're tasked with delivering drug. You've got 50 different things on your plate and nobody to help you. So you have a bandwidth issue. So when you have a bandwidth issue and you need another skilled set of hands to do the things you know how to do, but you don't have the time to do it, and you've got other priorities. So that's another place where you'd bring in a consultant. And that's how I started. So to give a perfect example, you've got a CMC director and they need to outsource a project. They have the technical background, but let's be honest, supply chain and procurement, negotiating contracts takes a lot of time, and it's not something you just sort of like throw over the fence to the legal team. You need to understand the contracts. You need to be able to identify the best CDMO partners. You have to be able to, in one philosophy, you need to objectively look at all the information and give the best advice to your clients. And this is the company you should go with because these are the criteria that are most important for this project, and that's unique to every other project. So here's a lead and a backup. Here's a package of the costs, the scope of work, the things that are left out, the potential challenges you might face in the development process. And here's where you might want to go if you're thinking longer term about scaling up, and launching the product. So that's kind of how I got into consulting in the first place. After coming out of Patheon, I kind of understood how CDMOs thought, how they try to position themselves, what projects are best for them, and which ones, well, it's a stretch, but they've got capacity. So let's try to, see if we can get it anyway, right? So there's definitely a personality to every CDMO, as there is with every company, and being the matchmaker was how I got into consulting in the first place.
Great. Thank you. And then obviously consultants don't just represent the biotechs, they can also represent the CDMOs themselves, but under the same job title, but they're actually supporting the CDMO. I mean, how does that side of consulting work?
Well, okay, again, it goes back to it's not defined.
Yeah.
So we run into sometimes these areas of friction because I was talking to Dave Schoenig a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about IPAC and the work I used to do with his organization. And he pointed out a distinction that I hadn't really made in my own mind. And he said something to the effect of, you have to define yourself, either you're a consultant or you're a business broker. And if you're a business broker, who are you representing, right? If you're representing the CDMO as a business broker, as an extension of their sales team, and actively going out there to sell their services, well then, in my mind, I need to have a certain amount of information. I need to have a certain amount of familiarity. I need to be onboarded to their processes. And I think the expectations would be different versus, hey, Ray, you represent a basket of clients of biotech companies. Would you give us some referrals and we'll pay you a fee? And so that's another thing that comes with its own set of problems too, because if I am being paid by my clients, I represent them, right? I am part of their organization because they are paying my bills. Is it right for me to accept referral fees from CDMOs in that type of scenario?
Yeah. Is it?
I've had debates with this, and where we are in this conversation is, so long as it's transparent, right? You would have to tell your client. And my argument against that is, well, how well can that kind of conversation ever go? And how does a client come away thinking, hey, you know what, I'm paying top dollar for this consultant and he's getting, or she's getting paid a commission on the other side. Shouldn't I be entitled to some of that savings? Or is the advice I'm getting from them truly objective? So I think a way to think about that maybe is, I think every consultant, after a certain amount of experience, can in their own mind come up with a set of preferred providers. I've had great experiences with CDMO X 5 times, and I know that they're going to do a great job for my client. So why shouldn't I do that? So there is an argument to be made on both sides.
I remember we spoke before, there was a particular Chinese CDMO which fell foul of Biosecure for a while, which you were saying, well, actually, in terms of cost, quality, everything, that was one of your preferred suppliers. But as you say, there's nothing wrong with having that experience, and indeed it's what you're paid for.
Yeah, even in an objective vendor selection process, I always leave room for intangibles, right? There's always you've got business, you've got operations, you've got technical capabilities, quality, of course, but then I always leave a little room for intangibles. Maybe you've worked with them. Maybe the client has a relationship with a company. Maybe they went to school with one of the, the key technical people over there. Maybe they're up and coming and they just opened this facility and they're giving great incentives or something like that. There's any number of things. So it's always important in an objective selection process, even to like maintain a little space at the end if they're, as a tiebreaker.
I think it's totally right that the person who's paying for that service should be made transparent to them if you're getting a kickback as well for, weighting that selection process.
Yeah. I mean, that's my opinion. And it's certainly a larger conversation that I'd like to have. And creating the platform to have that conversation, I think is what we're trying to do here, right? I was at Bio a couple months ago. I'm seeing that a lot of the CDMOs are trying to actively create networks of consultants. There's a realization more recently that consultants play a really important role in vendor selection, right? So this is something, again, at a level where you're not going to have the leadership of a company make these major decisions until everything is already packaged.
And a referral fee would typically be part of sort of that building that network.
I would imagine if there was a referral fee that was part of that obviously you would have to disclose it as you're putting together this package. Which
must be considerable. I mean, roughly, from what you've seen, what kind of referral fees are we talking about? Because you'd think that the size of the contracts, even just a percentage of that, would be significant.
There are no standards, but I would say that when I was a full-time salesperson for Patheon, you could get bonuses, or at least you could get commissions in addition to your base salary, which is already a 6-figure base salary. You could get commissions of 2 to 3%. So different types of services come at different types of costs. But yeah, it adds up. It's a significant amount of money when you're talking about $500,000 to a $1.5 million project for most. And then if you're talking about biologics, it's we've signed a lot of deals that are in the 7 figures, right? So that's what we're talking about. And you can see that the competition is very high.
Yep.
For those types of things.
Absolutely. I mean, what would a better way be then, Ray? So if there were to be a more standardized playing field, standardized business practices for consulting, I mean, what might that look like?
Okay, you're making me show my hand, right? But nothing wrong with socializing idea. Here's an idea I came up with sometime this year as I was talking to all these companies, trying to think through. It would be better if there was a referral fee. It would be better, in my mind, if that referral fee was made obvious up front and was paid to the client.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can see this, that means that the client is the one being incentivized to make a choice. The consultant remains free to be objective in their assessment. And if the consultant and the client agree, then the consultant could share some of that savings, some of those discounts.
Interesting. We've talked a bit about the referral fee issue. Are there any other sort of issues similar to that, business practices, which you think need to be reevaluated, maybe even accredited?
I think on the other side, with biotech companies, of course, you're dealing with risk. Biotech companies, especially now, are struggling to find capital, and they have to be very circumspect about how they deploy that capital. And what happens is we create a working condition for consultants where I see a lot of consultants, myself included, taking on the risk of a biotech company. And what I mean by that is I'll do all this work not knowing if I'm going to get paid because they might not have they might not have access to capital. And those are very real world problems. But as I look across the industry that doesn't exist, this pharmaceutical consulting industry, there's no way to really just say, hey, here's what, here's how you protect yourself.
That's interesting.
Right? The whole point of consulting is I'm not taking on the risk. I just go out there and do my job. Consultants go out there, they do their job, they file their invoices, they get paid. It's fee for, a lot of times it's fee for service. That's the general model. And yes, we can devise other types of risk sharing models. Having done this, I've set up contracts in any different way: flat fees, deferred payments, equity swaps, all kinds of different things. But I think that way that there's a better understanding on both sides about who's carrying the risk. And if you're a consultant, understanding that you are bearing a lot of the risk. That's part of the startup dance is to raise capital.
Yep.
to spend it wisely and achieve your milestones, right? And to a large extent, the biotech companies have come to rely on consultants to help them do that, to give them the flexibility to move forward. I mean, I think it's understandable as I go in as a consultant. I say this all the time. If you don't like what I'm doing, you can cut off the contract at any time. Like as a consultant, I accept that risk. That's the risk I accept. But it's different to say, hey, let's go 2 or 3 months of unpaid invoices before somebody says, hey, wait a minute, I don't think this is a fair working condition.
Yeah. Is there a need then for a collective position amongst pharma consultants around negotiating rates, scope of work, terms, all those areas?
I think there's room for it. Right now, like here in the States, this debate or discussion about labor statistics and who heads the Bureau of Labor Statistics and how do we report unemployment and everything. I do not believe that any data exists on pharmaceutical consulting as an employment sector, right? So I couldn't even tell you. I don't know if anybody knows how many people out there are calling themselves pharmaceutical consultants and how many of them are employed and what we're getting paid and how many are incorporated and how many are independent. Like none of that information exists. So it's hard to say, oh, this is what the standard rate is. I've spoken to other consultants that have been on the buy side, and they, just like I do with CDMOs, they hire consultants, so they have a very good idea of what the range is. But that's always going to be a very small data set.
It's almost a shadow industry, isn't it? A shadow sector.
Yeah. And that's, like after doing this for 15 years plus, it's a little bit frustrating, because none of that information exists. And, I heard the comment, and I've seen it in real life, the consultants are competing against each other hard, right? It seems like we're all fighting for the same piece of pie.
Does it feel that way when you're walking around a trade show? Obviously, you know who the other consultants are in your space.
Oh, absolutely. And there's been a shift as well. At first, I think after COVID ended and we started going back to conferences, I heard the complaints from a lot of people, oh, there's nobody here but consultants. And I think that shift, when I was at CDMO Live in Rotterdam, it was like, oh, this is great. There's lots of consultants. You know why? Because I could court a biotech company for years and hope that they have a project for me and they've got 2 products in their pipeline. I work with you consultants. You've got 6 or 7 clients and all of them are outsourcing simultaneously. Otherwise, they wouldn't need you, right? So I can see that and sense that. And so when we go to these trade shows, I'll attend at least one where a CDMO is hosting an event only for consultants, or at least with the objective of, let's get the consultants in here, let's build our network. And, it's underscoring for me the importance of us, banding together, defining our profession, setting standards and saying, okay, let's do this. Let's figure out ethical ways to work with these CDMOs because we rely on each other heavily.
It would be great to talk then, Ray, about how all of this could be improved, because you've been working on something to address some of these challenges. How could this work in practice?
Right. My summer project this year, following bio and having conversations with Catalent and Thermo Fisher and a lot of the other, it was almost a challenge. They said, I dare you to start something. It was like, you know what, I will. You know what? Like after having these conversations and seeing how important it is for CDMOs to have a sounding board, to have these conversations, and then to have like an aggregation of all these consultants. So if they need some, or if their clients need somebody, they can refer them to an organization as opposed to a person. It gives them like another layer of like arms distance. Like, look, sure, we know lots of consultants, but if you're looking for something, here's a directory of all these people that could help you if you're looking for that kind of assistance, right? So it also gives them a little bit of an arm's length referral to be able to help their clients, right? So understanding that, after 15 years that this really isn't a defined profession, that we don't have any standards and practices, we have no set of ethics that we run by. I was like, well, it does make sense. Why don't we put together a platform? And I've seen job boards. That's different, right? Like what do all consultants have in common? We're all looking for business, right? So that's important. So the idea of a professional organization, a professional trade organization for pharma consultants will give us the opportunity to define the profession educate its members. Right now, there is no certification for consultants. Anybody can call themselves a consultant. I was talking to a potential board member, and she had mentioned, hey, wouldn't it be great if there was some sort of a certification process so that you have to like clear a couple of hurdles. And if you were a certified consultant, would that give you an edge over other consultants? So I was like, absolutely. Right. And so education, would be one of the main thrusts here. Not education necessarily in a technical area. I'm not talking about, hey, let's talk about taxes, tariffs, and cold chain operations, and what's the latest coming out of Washington. That's different. It's more about the nuts and bolts of how do you start a business? How do you survive and thrive as a consultant? How do you graduate to the next level of consultant? Maybe you're just getting into it. You're starting out. You've got lots of questions here in the U.S. LLC versus S Corp. Which are you going to pick? What kind of insurance do you have to have? And then we start talking about, well, how do you expand your business? You've gotten to 40 hours of billable a week and you're not sleeping and you can't take a break because all your clients are relying on you. How do you bring on help? Right. And so how do you bring on additional consultants and become more than a sole proprietor? Let's talk about that. So there's a lot, I think, that we could do in education. And then advocacy. So this is the collective bargaining piece where, all right, let's have those conversations. How do consultants work with CDMOs? So I'm having lunch with Gil this week. I'm really excited about talking to him. I want to pick his brain about how he started PBOA.
Yep.
How he did his membership drives. I'm interested in compliance, right? Because I think it's really important to do this as a nonprofit. I think it's important that we have a very clear mission that is of consultants, run by consultants, for our benefit, right? This is something that, goes beyond what I'm trying to do with SCxCMC and my consulting practices. It's really, what does the industry look like as a whole? And I think I want to run it that way. And it gives me the opportunity to seat a board of like-minded professionals that are in this industry and to get their thoughts. So what I'm seeing in CMC is my viewpoint. And of course, I'm going to put CDMOs front and center in terms of, hey, we need a platform so that Gil's organization, PBOA, has somebody to talk to on the other side of the table if they want to establish standards and practices for how we do business processes. But as I'm seeing, so many consultants out there are in regulatory compliance. So I didn't think that we would have to send envoys down to Washington to talk to the agency or talk to the government, but maybe we do. And so I think that being inclusive in our board and our membership and acknowledging that in healthcare, there are many forms, many functional areas where consultants contribute greatly. And I would like us to have a holistic approach and try to represent and be inclusive.
Very interesting.
Of all these folks that are out there considering themselves consultant and making a life for themselves and careers.
Where do you see this going, Ray? I mean, if you were to look 5 years' time from now, how would you hope that the consulting landscape in biopharma might have changed?
I always think in terms of who are your customers, right? So the customers here are the biotech companies. How can we do better at providing services to the biotech companies that employ them? And in exchange, how do we create better working conditions? And so a couple of places, and I'm a little wonky on this because of my time in business development in contracts, right? So a lot of it comes down to, let's agree on what are standard terms and conditions that we work on. In other words, every consultant out there should have a consulting services agreement that they sign with their clients. And they should understand what's in there. And very often, and it's perfectly fair for a biotech company to say, no, we're going to use ours. We have 50, 60, 70 consultants. And so it would be great if we had a governing body or at least an industry trade organization that would work with biotech companies to ensure that there are fair terms, or say, here's our standard consulting agreement that we recommend that all of our members use. And if a biotech company chooses not to use this, well, then at least you understand the terms and you can actually review their contract, and negotiate terms that protect you as a consultant, regardless if you're a small company or independent contractor or at a large firm.
Yep. Seems like a good place to start. It's so much easier to plug and play and for everyone to work with each other if the playing field's leveled.
Yeah. I remember when PBOA started, they were sort of a one-issue lobbying group, right? It was hey, we need a voice at the table with these user fees.
Yes.
In the United States. right? That was the one thing. It branched out from there, but that was kind of like their defining moment. I think the defining thing here is, how do consultants work with CDMOs in an ethical way that is not a conflict of interest and get something from it, right? So I think that that's the conversation I want to start with. And then in terms of trying to band together and survive, thrive as consultants, with collective bargaining power, we could come to guys like you and say, hey, I would like a discount to your next conference for my members, right? And I can ensure that I get like 60, 70, 80 more people to show up, right? Because it's expensive to go to these conferences. And it doesn't just stop there. Everything from QuickBooks to banking fees to anything else, with a critical mass of consultants or of members, we can go to any one of these vendors and say, look, we'd like to negotiate discounts for our members. That's a bit of a no-brainer, right? I talked to my friends at the American Bar Association, and that's maybe the only thing they get is discounts off of the, like office supplies. But yeah, I mean, I think together we can do a lot, all right? And we can do a lot better than we're doing now, as an industry. And as we said, right now it's just the Wild West. It's just like a overgrown field of everybody doing their own thing. And how do we sort of curate this into something that's more organized?
A great mission. Ray, thank you so much for talking to us about this first as well. Appreciate it's at a very early stage. But if anyone wants to get in touch with you, I guess if they look you up on LinkedIn or email you
or Sison at SOPPhC.org.
Okay.
So that's Society of Professional Pharmaceutical Consultants.org.
You heard it here first.
There you go. All right, Luke, thank you so much for giving me the time and space to introduce this whole concept that's new but not new.
Yeah. Very exciting. Thanks so much, Ray. Have a good day.